Hunter-Killer, which is a subscription service that gives you everything you need to solve a new and interesting mystery every month. With each box, you'll go through piles of evidence, audio recordings. You'll learn of a story across complicated details that weave them together. And you can sort of think of it delivered to your door. You can play with family, friends, or if you're like me and you're not the most sociable of the bunch, you can also play solo. And it's a good excuse to do something different besides just scrolling endlessly on your phone each night. And with certain box, $25. It's a great deal for the amount of entertainment as opposed to the Cold Case Foundation. Your fun you have playing Hunter-Killer contribute to solving real-world game cause. And thanks to the folks over at Hunter-Killer, today you'll get a better price. Just head.com use code sociable to save 20%. Once again, that's hunterkiller.com/sociable and use code sociable so they know I sent you. Thanks again to Hunter-Killer. The year is 2003. A woman by the name of Lori Erica Kennedy had just met a man by the name of Blake Ruff at a Bible study in the eastern part of Texas. Shortly after, they hit it off, start dating, and that relationship would eventually lead to a marriage. While they were excited to take the relationship to the next level, when push came to shove, Lori made one thing clear. She did not want a wedding, or even an announcement in the paper, instead electing to quietly elope with only a pastor present. While this was weird to Blake, it wasn't enough to stop him from proceeding. After all, Blake noticed that Lori was a secretive person, not willing to comment much on her past life, as well as often filling in the blanks vaguely in regards to her previous experiences. She had once told Blake that she had a rough childhood, burning all of her photos from that time. She claimed her father was a failed stockbroker, and that she did not have any siblings. Blake, being a matter-of-fact and trusting person, seemed to take her at face value and presume nothing of it. However, as time would progress, Lori's secretive nature seemed to weigh on the relationship. After marriage, their immediate goal was to have a child, which after multiple attempts at having children, they had not been successful. While eventually Lori was ultimately able to have a child in vitro in 2008, shortly after, it's reported that her mental state seemed to decay. She seemed to be incredibly overprotective of her daughter, not allowing her in laws to even hold the baby. And despite her being incredibly secretive about her past, she would apparently go to great lengths to track down every detail regarding the Ruffs family, going as far as to research specific things like family recipes. But on the other hand, she took absolutely no in talking to the family at family gatherings. Eventually, Lori cut all contact between the child and her in laws. Her inability to blend with her in laws caused strain in the marriage, in conjunction with her secretive past, which ultimately caused Blake to file for divorce in 2010. Lori gained full custody of her daughter, and Blake moved back in with his family. Subsequently, during the months after her breakup, Lori's condition seemed to worsen. She began harassing the Ruffs, sending threatening emails, stalking them, and she stole a pair of their house keys. And a neighbor of Lori's had reported seeing her rambling to herself, pacing back and forth outside of her home. Lori's daughter looked thin. In an attempt to console Lori about the situation, Denny, a neighbor of hers, had offered to take her to church for counseling. And according to an article from the Seattle Times, it would state, she was frantic, about to the point of incoherence, he said. From that point on, I never saw her focus again. Denny suggested Lori come to counseling at the church where he served as a pastor. She brought in notebooks in which she rambled about, quote, what was wrong with her and how she could get him back, he said. As Lori sat down to talk, Denny couldn't help but notice her hands. They were, quote, the longest I'd ever seen a person, and they were always moving. She'd hold her hand out at it. Then she'd turn it over more and finally put it back in her lap. Her hands were important to her for some reason, he said. Lori spoke in circles, covering the same ground over and over. She'd say, quote, this is what's going on with Blake and me. And the next sentence was, quote, with Blake and me. It would go on like that for an hour. When she had a particular thought, her mind was stuck on it, he said to him. To him, it seemed like an obsessive compulsive disorder. Blake said he remembered her taking medication for ADHD or Tourette's syndrome for counseling sessions too, along his brother, David. It was strange, Denny said. David did most of the talking as if he was translating for Blake. In the end, the counseling could not repair the marriage. This entire situation came to a head on December 24th, 2010. Lori had reportedly taken the drive on Christmas Eve morning from her home in Leonard, Texas, traveled a whole 20 miles in Longview, Texas. When Blake's father had opened the garage that morning, he reportedly found her car idling, where she had apparently passed away as a result of doing. The cause of death was a self-inflicted shot. From here, they found two notes, an 11-page one to her husband, and one for her daughter, for her to open when she turned 18. Both haven't publicly. They noted that they were clearly from someone who was mentally disturbed. Hereafter, the family apparently wanted to know more about Lori's past, and after the family would take a trip to Lori's home, and they found the contents of her entire house array. Papers were scattered, trash was stacked, laundry was thrown out, countless dirty dishes remained, and hidden inside her house was a single box was eventually pried open with tools. It would reveal various documents pertaining to Lori's past. As it would turn out, she had got a name, and inside the box was the birth certificate of one Becky Sue Turner, a 2-year-old infant who had passed away in a house fire. They found various scribbled notes, such as things like 402 months, which was believed to be the length of a possible jail sentence. They found a for a district attorney by the name of Ben Perkins in California. He said he had no memory of ever meeting Lori. As they sift further, they found a letter of recommendation from one Roger Steinbeck, printed on stationery from a 5-star hotel in Thailand. This letter of recommendation help from these individuals, Social Security Administration, however, but they did figure out a couple. Learned that Lori had requested a copy of the birth certificate of Becky Sue Turner in 1988. And that same year, it was used to obtain a state ID in Idaho. 3 weeks after that, Becky Sue Turner appeared before a judge in Dallas and had her name legally changed to Lori Erica Kennedy. After changing her name, she then applied for her Social Security card. Subsequently, she'd then get her GED and go on to college, until she'd file for bankruptcy and then graduate. Someone who knew her around these years had claimed that she had worked as an exotic dancer to pay for college. She had apparently graduated the University of Texas with a degree in business administration. And now, as stated previously, investigators had hit a dead end at every turn. And in an attempt to aid the investigation, Social Security Administration had worked with the Seattle Times to publish a story to get help from the public. The story was republished again and again until some breakthrough could be made. And while Lori's story became an online sensation among mystery aficionados, over this time, many theories ranged far and wide. Was she a spy? Was she someone who had done something terrible? Or was she running from someone? It wouldn't be until 2016 that we would get an answer. That's when Colleen Fitzpatrick, a nuclear physicist, would read an article about Lori's mystery in the Seattle Times and reached out to her family to help piece the puzzle together. Even though they did not have access to Lori's DNA at the time, they had the next best thing: Lori's daughter's DNA. Colleen submitted Lori's daughter's DNA and conducted a family search. It stated that a man by the name of Cassidy was probably Lori's first cousin, and reached out to Michael through 23andMe.com's messaging service, but he never replied. Years later, another close match was made on Lori's DNA that also connected to Michael Cassidy. After spending months building a family tree of the Cassidys, she speculated that Lori's mother was one of the true identity of Lori Erica Ruff. Her real name was Kimberly McLean, and shortly after her to confirm, being out occurred a comment about the reason that Kimberly had left. Kimberly's uncle was willing to talk a bit more, though, and he said that family night and vacations, that she had a relatively normal suburban childhood. Though by the time her parents married shortly after, where she went on to live with her new stepdad in a different town, to happen with Kimberly. Within a year, apparently, she couldn't adjust to the new house and school, and close to her birthday, she had simply left and told them not look for her, and assured them that they would never find her twice. Now, it's worth considering that this story about her leaving home in 1986 is just what the uncle had to say from his point of view. And while this case, it's still incredibly difficult to say exactly what motivated her to change her name. Keep in mind, it was 2 years after Kimberly ran away that she would actually get the name of Becky Sue Turner. Furthermore, naturally, you have to ask, how does a 18-year-old girl leave home and suddenly have expertise on how to dodge the guise of Big Brother, not showing up in any kind of database, leaving no paper trail, and not to mention the implications of requiring resources to travel the United States to put this new identity into play? I think it's unclear. It's hard to get a full picture of what went on without beyond stealing an identity. Lori doesn't appear to have committed any serious crimes aside from that. The theories have ranged far and wide about Lori/Kimberly. During that 2-year period, had she committed some heinous crime under another identity? Or was it possible that she was running away from someone or something that she was frightened of? Lori was adamant of no public announcement being made about her marriage, meaning that her changing her last name would have fallen just slightly farther under the radar. I think it may also be worth considering if the story we're being told by the press is actually the truth, or if the Ruff family was actually being truthful about the actual reasons for the breakup. Because one very interesting detail seriously begs that question. On the other, what nobody seems to have pointed out, there are some inconsistencies. According to the Freedom of Information Act request papers pertaining to this Social Security investigation, they appear to have caught the Seattle Times author in a lie. And I want to remind you that the Seattle Times was essentially doing this story for the Social Security investigation. Longview Police Department believed that Jane Doe was prepared to harm her in laws, but when she discovered that they were not home, she took her own life. Assuming that the Ruffs were not home on Christmas Eve morning, the entire time of events that were given in this Seattle Times article is completely off. Additionally, when this was brought up to the author of the Seattle Times article, who has definitely seen the police report, they would flat out deny this particular detail. But I digress. Because while Lori's case is interesting, it's actually not unique. And while there was some speculation with the original Seattle title that Kimberly may have solicited the services of an identity broker, it's only until you look at other stories similar to this one that you start to notice a trend. July 30th, 2002. 64-year-old Joseph Newton Chandler had been found dead by suicide. He was found for over a week. Able to and they could find any kind of fingerprint else in his house. 3 months before he had passed away, Chandler had purchased a firearm at a nearby store. He had also just been recently diagnosed with colon cancer, perhaps choosing to go on his own terms, but $82,000 was left in Chandler's bank account. He did not leave any kind of will. Checking through the emergency contact to find any kind of kin, it led to his sister, Mary, but the emergency contact led to an address that was an empty parking lot. Investigators had searched for Chandler's next of kin and soon discovered that the man wasn't who he claimed to be. And it's also worth noting that Chandler had kept a packed suitcase, seeming to indicate that he was ready to go at a moment's notice. He had stolen the identity of an 8-year-old boy who had passed away in a car crash on Christmas Day in 1945. In a similar turn of events, the story would make it out to the press, and internet sleuths would theorize about who Chandler really was. But in spite of this, the case went cold for over a decade. By 2014, when U.S. Marshals took over the case, they learned that Chandler had undergone a medical procedure in the year 2000. And at the hospital, they apparently still had his tissue sample. This DNA was compared against modern databases. And in a similar turn of events, they then contacted Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick, the same forensic genealogist from earlier. As a result of the forensic investigation, they were able to make a breakthrough. Joseph Chandler's original identity was Robert Nichols, and after interviewing his son, authorities were able to get some insight into his past life. Nichols, born in 1926, made his true age at the time of passing 76 years old. Nichols was also a veteran who served in World War II. He received a Purple Heart. But after returning home from the war, he moved on to a normal civilian life. He was married with 3 children. While settling down, he got a job at General Electric as a draftsman, but in a rather bizarre turn of events, he would randomly leave his family one day without much explanation, stating that, quote, in due time, you'll find out why. This led to a divorce shortly after, and Nichols leaving their home in New Albany, Indiana, to head to Dearborn, Michigan, to also work as a draftsman. He would subsequently get laid off, and on March 9th, 1965, Nichols would send a postcard to his parents from Stroud, Oklahoma, claiming that he was heading west. On March 20th, 1965, he would send another letter from Richmond, California, near San Fran, stating, "Please don't worry about me. I'm well and happy. I will write as often as I possibly can to let you know how I'm doing." And his last ever communication was with his eldest son. But it wasn't any kind of letter, and instead he had just sent him a penny with no context, and in this final postcard it came from Napa, California. And after this final cryptic message from him, the family would never hear from him again, and he was reported as a missing person. It wouldn't be until 13 years later, in 1978, that Nichols assumed the identity of the already dead Joseph Newton Chandler III. After gaining a copy of the child's birth certificate, his social security card, he applied for credit, and the next 24 years, like a chameleon, blended harmoniously in society as a Joseph Newton Chandler, electing to quietly hide away in Eastlake, Ohio. From the outside, Chandler seemed to live a quiet life from his one-bedroom apartment. Inside were homemade gadgets he built, get rich quick books, and a calendar where it was found that he had crossed out the day until he passed away. He worked as an engineer at Lubrizol, where coworkers stated that Chandler's behavior could be at times interesting. He occasionally told a few coworkers that he was stating that someone was, quote, getting close, but he never cared to elaborate further. According to his medical reports in 1989, Chandler had gone to the hospital with a life-threatening injury, and he had claimed that he had gotten injured from being a bit too intimate with his vacuum cleaner. And it had apparently resulted. A coworker recalls that he once drove all the way to an LL Bean store 700 miles away, only to return home after there were, quote, no parking spots. He would apparently listen to, he apparently this Halloween party was his own, and sat in the corner and spoke to no one the entire night. On the surface, outside of this strange behavior, Nichols' life was as boring as you could expect it to be. But as these other details come to life, you must change his identity. He clearly had something to hide. Was he a fugitive? Was he just paranoid? Or was he running away from illegal trouble or unpayable debts? There must have been some reason he never contacted his family again. One can only speculate. It's also worth considering the fact that there is a massive gap between the time that he goes missing and the time that he assumes his identity. Given the fact that he did nothing for 17 years, you have to assume he would have left some paper trail somehow, meaning it may have been possible that he not only switched his name once, but possibly twice or even three times. Given this ability to elude a big brother, we only know where he started and ended. And just like in the case of Kimberly McLean, we still don't fully understand why. While Kimberly and Robert's cases are particularly mysterious, they are far from unique. 2002, when a friend of his had passed away as the result of a heart attack. The man had stolen the identity of a child who died in 1973. Once again, a very similar situation. In this particular case, the guy had lived out the rest of his life just a couple of hours away from his family. In February of 2013, a revelation came forth when it was reported that Britain's police force had stolen the identities of some 80 deceased children and issued fake passports in their name for undercover operations. Another man by the name of John Vincent had escaped a halfway house in Texas in 1986. Then he had been caught impersonating a dead child's identity for over 20 years. He had raised two kids under that name, got married twice, and proceeded to live his life as normal until he got caught. Now, whenever there's a discussion on this type of case, what often gets overlooked is the method in which these two people had used in order to live under a new name. And while I'm sure many of you are more familiar with traditional identity theft, such as stealing a credit card for fraudulent purchases, in these two particular cases, it's a type of identity theft called ghosting. This is what you would call literal identity theft, where the goal is to steal an identity long term, where you're actually trying to live under that stolen identity. And to put it frankly, I want to say that this video is obviously for educational purposes only. I in no way condone you breaking the law. Moreover, I should say that this method used by Lori and Chandler in the day is completely outdated. And for those people who have managed to fly under the radar in the past couple decades, it largely stems from them stealing identities decades ago. On top of that, as governments have gotten better at record keeping, moving over from paper to digital, this isn't something that will likely ever be the same again. But to continue on into the specifics behind this particular method as it used to be, it largely originates from one particular source, a source that has a lot of untold history. Now, the book that I'm speaking of came from Eaton Press, a controversial publication that is simple guides on various skeevy subjects. So you had things like classic mail frauds, how to beat the bill collector, and the most popular title is what this video is really all about. Published in 1970, The Paper Trip was an obscure and short book Sold in local counterculture newspapers and eventually other papers, it outlined one very particular instance in which someone could quite literally trip up Big Brother and steal a full identity with ease. It involved people acquiring a real birth certificate in a dead child's name and using it as the breeder document, which then could obtain a social security card, a driver's license, credit cards, and create a new identity. And if there's something we've seen from the cases like Lori Ruff and Mr. Chandler, it's that they ended up doing that. If you recall, they could not get any usable prints off of Chandler. Now, normally you might not think much of this, but if you've read the paper trip and you know what he's referring to, there's a specific section on avoiding getting fingerprinted. And in particular, it talks about getting your fingers grafted in a medical or alternatively burning your fingers with acid. And in regards to Lori, aside from the ID, if you recall, she faked those letters of recommendation, which is also recommended in some of those books. And if you recall the fact that Chandler had a packed bag, that is also another bit of advice that comes from the paper trip, as they discuss moving on to the next identity at any given moment. And it's safe to say that if they're practicing all of these things on a regular their primary identity, they were probably doing a list of other things for their other identities. And it was reported in 1983 that some 75,000 individuals had avoided arrest using these particular guidebooks. And if you really stop to think about this for a moment, this one book influenced a lot of people's ways of living. While it was initially released as a way of dodging the draft, it's safe to say that many people may still living under an identity that they forged from one of these methods. Being said, it really makes you wonder if everyone you meet is really who they say they are. But that being said, I'm barely sociable, and have a good night.
Completely, completely nuts. When I say these people do some stuff that would amaze the normal person, but when we think about it, we know these people are so weird. There's not much we can put past them. Thinking about how a person would just be able to take on a whole nother identity and assume another person's life. They just see, oh, they look in the paper, oh, this person's dead. Let me just take over their life. I want their name and so on and so forth. And how could that be like even considered to be normal? It's completely sick. So yeah. Also thinking about today's killers, the people that do things to kill us on a natural basis. We're just living our normal lives, not knowing or realizing anything that might be harmful to us. You're cooking for your family, you're off to work, you're doing a couple of things that you think would be beneficial. And next thing you know, check this out. There's always something. So let's check out a few things that have been going on for the longest. The evils of today's time, right? There's so many things that are going on we're not even aware of. And when being aware of these things, maybe it makes sense to us. The ease of, cooking, not having to scrub a pan or, something like that, thinking that, that's going to help you when it could actually be very harmful to you. So let's check out this information on the DuPont and Teflon.
You know Teflon, the stuff used in non-stick pans.
Well, good thing it's Teflon.
Made with a chemical called C8, Teflon revolutionized the cooking industry for people all over the world.
They won't stick. That's why it's called non-stick. I don't know what non-stick means in Texas, sweetheart, but me.
And Teflon and C8 went on to be used in a ton of other consumer goods. Popcorn bags, waterproof jackets, dental floss, food containers, makeup, pizza boxes, all has some form of C8 or C8 derivatives in them. The problem was C8 and most of the chemicals like it are extremely toxic and are what's known as forever chemicals because they never break down. But what the public doesn't know, they'll keep buying, so we'll just keep this between us.
Now that's cookie.
It became widely used in products that come in contact with people's food, and making C8 takes a lot of work. A lot of work that produces a lot of chemical waste that we have to get rid of somewhere, so why not dump it in the waterways around our factories? I mean, come on, you're not gonna pay for expensive, responsible chemical waste disposal when there's a perfectly good river right there next to your factory. So over the decades, C8 spread from the rivers into farms, into tap water, into animals that we eat, and ultimately into us. To where today, 99.7% of Americans have C8 in their bloodstream, with C8 being linked to at least 6 diseases, including testicular cancer and kidney cancer. So how did an obscure chemical company get into the bloodstream of nearly every single American? And most importantly, how did they get away with it? Just asking for a friend. This is how DuPont poisoned the world.
Oh. Well, good thing it's Teflon.
Even burned food won't stick to Teflon, so it's always easy to clean. Cookware never needs scouring. If it has DuPont, Teflon.
Out of chemical research come the thousands of products that contribute to better living. The DuPont Company, maker of better things for better living.
DuPont started in 1802 in Delaware. It was the brainchild of a French-American chemist and industrialist named Il était Irénée Dupont de Nemours.
Et le terre Irénée Dupont de Nemours.
Okay, not bad. I can't get the sound, but close enough. And DuPont started out as a mill and production company out of all things. A lot of business supplying the wars that broke out throughout the country. By the time the American Civil War hit, DuPont was the biggest supplier of gunpowder to the US military. So DuPont started out as war profiteers, which, if you see you very lucrative to be in. Ironically enough, the founder of DuPont came to America to escape the French Revolution, but it was never enough. You lived and breathed innovation, which led to the development of hundreds of different chemicals and materials over the years. Kevlar used in bulletproof armor today, Lycra, nylon, all these revolutionary materials that would go on the world were all made by DuPont.
Even your car.
And makes all.
Something was missing. So you started buying up. It was so extreme in 1912, your shopping spree caught the government's attention because you started turning the gunpowder business into your own monopoly. And as soon as you were declared a monopoly, you were ordered to divest from the industry. And your age of controlling the gunpowder business was over. Without the cash cow that was gunpowder, you needed something else to bring in revenue. And since DuPont were already experts at chemistry, you got involved in almost every chemical-related industry in the book. But everything changed in 1938. The world was on the verge of World War II, and Dr. Plunkett, whom we talked about earlier, accidentally discovers Teflon. Why don't most people know about this dark side of DuPont? Because DuPont is a master at branding. However, designing a profitable brand can be really difficult and expensive. Luckily today, there's a one-stop shop for all your graphic design and branding needs. And that one-stop shop is Canva. Canva allows you to make these amazing professional-looking Instagram stories, YouTube thumbnails, YouTube intro animations, slide decks, desktop wallpapers, infographics, even full-blown videos. It's honestly pretty insane how much you can do. Canva has thousands of easy-to-use customizable templates made by professional designers, stuff that actually looks shockingly good. It's super intuitive to use. You can work on mobile or desktop, Canva basically makes it impossible for you to make something ugly. And Canva even has a completely free version as well. But you really want to get Canva Pro, or else you're going to miss out on a ton of tools that are going to save you hours of tedious work. One of my favorite features of Canva Pro is their Canva Content Planner, which allows you to schedule the stuff you make in Canva to go live on almost all the major social media platforms. Social media schedulers usually cost around the same amount as Canva Pro anyways, so this feature alone pays for itself. My other favorite feature is their instant one-click background remover. Removing a background is usually a really frustrating process you have to do manually in a more advanced editing tool, but this one is in one click. So if you're interested in trying out Canva, they've got you with a free 45-day trial with the link below. A ton of my friends use Canva Pro, and so you have no use. Give it a try for by using the link in the video description below. Thanks to Canva for sponsoring this video.
Makers of better things for better living through chemistry. Nearly everything in our lives is improved by chemistry, from transportation to the clothes we wear. Chemistry helps bring us better food, makes our homes more beautiful, more comfortable, helps protect our health, and adds to the enjoyment of our leisure time.
Teflon is made using a chemical called C8, also known as PFOA, or this long word. Being that it repels water, oil, stains, and can withstand a lot of heat, Teflon was perfect to coat the tanks and military vehicles the army was going to need for World War II. Instead of rain, mud, and it would simply slide off the surface if it was coated in Teflon material from clumping while it was being applied. At the time, C8 or PFOA was seen as completely safe. This new wonder material could change the world, but there was a problem. Teflon production in the 1940s was expensive. So expensive that making everyday items unthinkable to meet growing demand being as low as possible, you would need an affordable source of C8. And that's where 3M came in. Around the same time, named had the idea of coating all his fishing gear in Teflon to keep it from getting tangled. No one really knows if this ever worked, because at the exact same time, Teflon coated cooking wouldn't need or soak together. People could just wipe the food off with a damp cloth. And so Teflon, and it would change the course of the food industry forever. Suddenly, we realized all the possibilities that came with Teflon in the manufacturing and distribution of it.
Some people use a little oil or butter when they cook so that things don't stick to the pan. I use polytetrafluoroethylene.
Now that's cooking.
So you sat back and watched the fortune start rolling in. The world started going crazy for non-sticking ovens and Teflon-coated furniture. But you knew this craze was unsustainable and didn't recognize PFOA as a dangerous chemical. Both DuPont and 3M knew it specified that it should never be flushed into sewers or surface water, which means that way back before Teflon grew into the global material it is today. But that didn't stop you from making millions from the new Teflon-coated inventions that were being created almost every day. So how did DuPont go about following those instructions to dispose of C8? Dumping it into the planet, of course. In one town alone, Parkersburg, West Virginia, the DuPont Teflon manufacturing plant dumped hundreds of thousands of pounds of C8 into the Ohio River, and that was just the beginning.
What's this Silverstone fry? Oh, the non-stick Silverstone is available on bakeware, such as cake pans, muffin pans, cookie sheet pans. Most foods won't stick to Silverstone, cleaning up is quick and easy. So let Silverstone take you out of the frying pan and into bakeware.
Because the process to manufacture Teflon had been so to begin with, you needed to expenses as low as possible, dump it into rivers and unprotected was so much cheaper than using it the right way or building incinerators. But dumping C8 in pits and rivers meant it spread rather quickly, so within a few years, PFOA chemicals had seeped into the groundwater surrounding Parkersburg and nearby, same groundwater that was being used to drink for more than 100,000 people. You and 3M had your suspicions, but you didn't want to find out whether or not they were true. I mean, if you really didn't know C8 was toxic, there would always be some plausible deniability. The "I didn't know so you can't blame me" card that the government always pulls. But it got to a point where researchers at DuPont just couldn't let their curiosity go. And in 1961, they started secret medical studies on PFOA and C8, closed door more than 2 decades after production of Teflon started. And what they found was horrifying. C8, the same chemical that had been marketed as completely safe for decades, was extremely toxic to human and animals. Exposure to C8 increased the size of liver in rats, rabbits, and dogs. And if it had this effect on animals, who knows what it would have had on humans? But the profits were just too good to switch off, so the sale of Teflon continued, and the research results were carefully locked up. For a few years, it looked like you could keep your secrets. That was until DuPont researchers discovered crazy high concentrations of PFOA in your workers' own blood, and the race was on. It was only a matter of time before something happened that exposed the dangers of PFOA, so to make sure the victims, they had to get to them first. So and monitoring their workers in secret. In 1981, 3M reported that PFOA caused birth defects in rats. So you reassigned pregnant women away from the Teflon manufacturing line and carefully observed their babies for any sort of defects. And when 2 out of 7 babies were born with eye defects, well, you denied all responsibility. Then in 1984, another report came out that PFOA dust was getting through the factory chimneys, settling on land far away from the factory, and had gotten into the local water supply. But again, you do not disclose this damning information. By the 90s, your PFOA $1 billion. This is generational wealth only a few could dream of, and you weren't just gonna give that up over C8 possibly being dangerous. So Teflon sales and ads kept growing.
Chemistry is the practice of magic. People think of Teflon and they think of frying pan. Teflon is not one thing. Putting Teflon on a surface will stop bugs from crawling up trees. They'll fall right off the tree. Teflon is a chain loop. This is something I've come up with for bicycles. You know, only DuPont makes Teflon. You can use it in satellites, on fabrics, or leather. When's the last time you heard about a leather raincoat? You can let your imagination run wild. It's not often that you get to make something new in this world.
While DuPont kicked the can down the road once more. Except now, decades of C8 exposure had passed, and its effects were finally starting to show.
Perfect eggs don't always start with the egg. They Silverstone, horrible nonstick surface ever made with DuPont. And just to prove our point,
from Teflon to Silverstone.
These letters and still not hurt Stone's non-stick performance. Safe. So no matter what you're making.
Parkersburg. A farmer by the name Wilbur Tennant was going through something strange. He had come across 2 dead deer and 2 dead cows at a nearby river. The deers had blood coming out of their noses.
I've taken 2 dead deer for this right here, and the deer died with hemorrhaging disease. The blood run out of their nose and out of their mouth, but they've never, DNR has never checked into it. The EPA of the state of West Virginia is trying to cover this stuff up.
Coincidentally, over the past few years, 100 of his 600 cows have been dead, all with the same MO. They show bleeding from their noses and had signs of serious illness and damage to their internal organs. All the cows had access to that same river.
A year later, he filmed what happened to his cows.
See, she's hemorrhaged out the nose. This is 153 of these animals that I've lost on this farm.
Coincidentally, not long before the cows started getting sick, the farmer's brother had sold 66 acres of land to DuPont to be used as a non-hazardous landfill. Also coincidentally, the river led upstream to a factory known as the DuPont Washington Works. It didn't take a genius to put together, so he went to DuPont. Obviously, they denied everything. What was danger, whenever he went to anyone in town for help, doctors, vets, and even local politicians and lawyers, no one was willing to help him. Vets wouldn't go to see Wilbur's cows. Lifelong friends of Wilbur and his family ignored them on the streets. They had to change their church 4 times. So Wilbur reached out to an environmental lawyer outside of Parkersburg named Rob Billets, who spent most of his career representing corporations like DuPont's. The lawyer took the case, and together they traced the cattle's illness to a pipe, clearly labeled DuPont's, that was pumping a green bubbly liquid into the creek from which Wilbur's cows drank, literally like something out of a movie. So in 1999, Rob Billet and Wilbur Tennant filed a federal lawsuit against DuPont's. As DuPont, a corporate nightmare for you. Your charade here was a complete nobody, an unknown cattle farmer who could potentially destroy your entire business. So you put the blame on him. It wasn't your non-hazardous waste that was making no how to the cows. If the cows were dying, it was their own fault. Now on paper, farmer should have given up pretty easily when bombarded with paper. But if he wanted to give up, his lawyer refused to throw in the towel. Then Billet found the smoking gun. In one letter from DuPont to the EPA, Billet found a reference to a cryptically named chemical, PFOA. No one at his firm knew what it was, but Billet and client were getting close to the truth. So when they came asking for documents DuPont had on the subject, DuPont outright refused. They may have found the smoking gun, but DuPont wasn't going to sign a stamped confession until they had no choice. Billet got a court order compelling DuPont to hand over all the information they had on PFOA, and DuPont submitted more than 110,000 pages. If you can't suppress the truth, you can at least hide it between 100,000 pages and hope it's never found. But Billet recognized the tactic and knew he was getting close. And by the end of the year 2000, he had everything he needed. The document explained in 1990, DuPont had knowingly dumped toxic PFOA waste into the landfill near Wilbur's property, knowing it drained into their land. Wilbur Tennant and his family settled. The farmer's fight was over. But for the lawyer, in his own words, he said, quotes, "I was irritated," end quotes. Irritated that DuPont.
So these people, along with many, many other corporations that are consistently doing what they need to do to make sure that they are increasing their pockets, and at the same time depleting your particular life, you know. So these are the things that are going on right now in our particular realm. Check out something else here that has to do with how you are actually being consumed in yourself with the things that these companies continue to make money off of, and actually increasing your debt.
Genetically modified organisms. Hosts have been the subject of
And when you consider the fact that 85% of all US corn is genetically modified, you'll realize that GMOs are actually all around you. That's why this week on Behind the Business, we'll be taking a look at the company that started it all, the world's largest seed company, Monsanto. Monsanto was originally founded as a chemical company in 1901 by John Francis Queeny. Queeny was in his 40s by that point, and he had had a pretty rough start to his life. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871 left his family homeless when he was only had to quit his education in order to start working full-time as an office boy at a wholesale drug firm. Through hard work and dedication, John climbed the ranks of the pharmaceutical industry, and he eventually moved to St. Louis in 1891 as a representative of the Mayer Brothers Drug Company, the largest drug distributor at the time. 5 years later, John married Olga Monsanto, decided to establish a business of his own, and he named his company after her. John established Monsanto in order to use air that is 300 times sweeter than table sugar and has effectively no nutritional value. Saccharin was first synthesized in 1879, and although it is a wildly popular sugar substitute today, back in the 19
Let's give it a minute. Looks like it's trying to stop on us. I see you have Nathan, Sally, Sue, Serpent Slayer, and also Zan. We're being in here bright and early. So let's give it a minute, let it catch up. Hopefully it won't kick me out again. Let me stop sharing and start it again and see what happens, guys. Give me a minute. It's really that can be target. Hold on. Let's see. Let me tell you, this is so weird that this will be doing all this crazy. Let's see.
Genetically modified organisms, or GMOs, have been the subject of controversy pretty
Monsanto was originally founded as a chemical company in 1901 by John Francis Queeny. Queeny was in his 40s by that point, and he had had a pretty rough start to his life. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871 left his family homeless when he was only 12. His education in order to start working full-time as an office boy at a wholesale drug firm. And thanks to the pharmaceutical, he eventually moved to St. Louis in 1891 as a representative of the Mayer Brothers Drug Company, the largest drug distributor at the time. 5 years later, John married Olga Monsanto, and when he decided to establish a business of his own in 1901, he named his company after her. John established Monsanto is 300 times sweeter than table sugar and has effectively no nutritional value. Saccharin was first synthesized in 1879, and although it is a wildly popular sugar substitute today, back in the 1900s, nobody in the US. Germany had a near monopoly on its production, and there wasn't a single manufacturer in the United States. John's newly established business was the first US saccharin producer, and the American market turned out to be very lucrative. One of his earliest customers was actually the Coca-Cola Company, which still uses saccharin in its popular diet. More food additives to Monsanto's repertoire, vanillin and coumarin, which up until then were also produced by the company. Monsanto barely turned a profit, since were constantly undercutting them. When the United States declared war, leaving a huge void, Monsanto was more than happy to fill. Its revenue jumped from $81,000 in 1913 to $905,000 in 1919, establishing Monsanto as one of the big U.S. chemical companies. 1919 also marked Monsanto's first steps abroad when it acquired a Welsh chemical producer that made aspirin and rubber catalyzers. This was Monsanto's first big acquisition, but it would definitely not be the last. It changed to feature industrial chemicals, the most notable one being polychlorinated biphenyl, or PCB. Now, PCBs can come in various molecular configurations, 209 to be precise, and all of them are very toxic. They're proven carcinogens and pollutants that are to eat and need about 200 days of direct sunlight down. If this was some exotic, rarely used chemical, you'd be wrong. PCBs were used as coolants in various electrical devices prior to the 1970s, most notably in power transformers and capacitors. Odds are, if you go to some of the more neglected city states, you find transformers with PCB warning labels. Monsanto was the only US producer of PCBs for almost 50 years before Congress finally banned the substance in 1979. Internal documents leaked in 2002 show that Monsanto was well aware of the toxicity of PCBs more than a decade before their eventual ban. In fact, Monsanto's first move at circumventing environmental laws happened all the way back in 1926 when the company incorporated a town in Illinois called, you guessed it, Monsanto. Back then, local jurisdictions were responsible for most environmental laws, and Monsanto town was very lenient with its regulations, so much so that Monsanto the company built just a PCB factory there. That town still exists, by the way, but it's called Sauget now, and it has 59 residents. The case with PCBs is one of the earliest examples of Monsanto's extreme for-profit culture that is short of an immortal internet meme. The sad thing is that Monsanto's awful reputation is actually pretty well deserved. More about that a little bit later. So, by the time the Second World War had started in 1939, Monsanto had established itself as the US military's premier chemical supplier. Their most valuable product at the time was styrene, a compound crucial for the production of synthetic rubber. Interestingly enough, Monsanto was also a large contributor to the Manhattan Monsanto in the polonium-based initiators used in the 2 atomic bombs dropped on Japan. During the post-war decades, Monsanto got into the agriculture business by developing pesticides. Their first one, called dichlorodiphenyl trichloroethylene, was banned later due to its extreme toxicity. Another herbicide produced by Monsanto was Agent Orange, which became infamous after the US military used it as a defoliant during Operation Ranch Hand of the Vietnam War. Agent Orange was very effective at destroying the crops of the Viet Cong. It was so toxic that it also ended up contaminating more than 3 million people and causing half a million Vietnamese children with deformities. The early 1970s saw Monsanto make huge progress in the development of LED lights. In fact, Monsanto was the first company to mass produce them, which brought the price of LEDs down from $200 to less than 10 cents apiece. Just a few years later, though, the US government finally cracked down on Monsanto's reckless use of harmful chemicals. The bans on PCBs and several pesticides hurt Monsanto's revenue greatly, and on top of that, several class action lawsuits were initiated that ended up costing hundreds of millions of dollars. After this, Monsanto's executives decided to shift the company's focus from chemical production and towards agricultural biotechnology. This transition occurred during the early 1980s, and back then, biotechnology was a very young science. Monsanto was early to the party, which gave the company's immense R&D division a head start. In 1983, Monsanto scientists, led by Robert Fraley, became the first in history to genetically modify plants. This pivotal achievement ushered in a new era for agriculture, the era of GMOs. Now, despite what the armchair experts from Twitter might be telling you, genetically modified crops are not bad in and of themselves. The reason there is such a negative perception of GMOs is that, as has happened numerous times in history, people take a good thing and out of greed take it far that it eventually becomes bad. GMO crops are a perfect example of this. There are a number of ways to genetically modify a crop without compromising the health of the people who eat it. Some of the most basic ones are shortening the plant's seed to seed period or outright pumping up the size of the resulting fruit or vegetable. Monsanto, however, in their quest for ever increasing yield, took GMO crops to a whole new level. Back in the early 1980s, when Monsanto was faced with a slew of lawsuits and a ban on its best products, they discovered glyphosate, an extremely potent herbicide that saved the company from potential bankruptcy. Monsanto marketed their herbicide under the name Roundup, and in the span of just 2 decades, it became the most widely used herbicide in the United States. The reason for its success lies in Monsanto's development of GMO crops. You see, in the past, farmers had to plant their seeds a good deal away from each other. They needed that space in order to till their fields, otherwise, weeds would grow around their crops and Monsanto developed GMO crops that were resistant to Roundup. However, a whole new avenue of cultivation emerged. Suddenly, farmers could plant their crops much closer together since they could just dump tons of Roundup derived crops without harming them. As you can imagine, this was a huge increase in crop yield, and combined with the cost reduction of not having to till the land as much, farmers quickly switched to Monsanto's GMO solution. Up until the year 2000, Monsanto was the sole producer of glyphosate due to the patents they held, and it is during this time that the company expanded into the titan that it is today. Roundup was, of course, just the beginning, and since then, Monsanto has spent tens of billions into the development of various pesticides and seeds. Last year alone, they spent $1.5 billion on R&D, and these investments have more than paid off. 2 years ago, Monsanto's GMO seeds accounted for 80% of the USA's total corn acreage, and today that number is even higher. One reason for Monsanto's immense success in the seed business is their creative use of patent seeds. Farmers who plant Monsanto's GMO seeds are subject to strict rules about what they can actually do with them. They are not allowed, for example, to replant these seeds, nor to sell or share them with anyone else, thus ensuring that Monsanto's revenue remains stable and growing. The language of these rules is so convoluted that farmers could potentially be found liable even in cases when the wind randomly blows Monsanto seeds from a neighbor's farm. To complete its transformation into a behemoth, in 1997, Monsanto spun off the entirety of its chemical business into a separate company called Solutia. This was Monsanto's attempt at a fresh start, and on their website they even claimed to be a relatively new company that just happens to share the same name with its polluting predecessor. Of course, this was all for show, as the new Monsanto's executives were the same people that had led the old company for decades. What they did with Solutia was to essentially try to wash their hands of Monsanto's morally questionable past. Solutia inherited not only the struggling chemical business, but also the majority of litigation relating to Monsanto's PCBs and other industrial pollutants. It probably won't come as a surprise that just 6 years later, later, Solutia filed for bankruptcy, eventually swallowed up by the Eastman Chemical Company. Numa, of course, has been incapable of shaking off its bad reputation, but that hasn't stopped its global expansion. Today, it's bigger than ever, with $15 billion of revenue just from last year alone. About half of that money, by the way, came from the sales of the Roundup pesticide and the GMO seeds resistant to it. It's sad how, despite all the boycotting and controversies, Monsanto's products are so ingrained in modern agriculture that there's just no getting rid of them. By all accounts, Monsanto's here to stay, but it's actually very possible that they'll soon stop being an independent company. Germany's pharmaceutical titan Bayer, on which we've also done a video by the way, had been trying to acquire Monsanto for the past 4 months. Just a few days ago, Monsanto accepted a $66 billion offer, which still needs regulatory approval, sure, but consider that in 14 months we've seen the mergers of six of the biggest companies in the industry, and so far analysts are giving the Bayer Monsanto merger a 50% chance of going through. Even if the merger fails, though, it's very hard to be optimistic about a Monsanto free future. From an investment point of view, it would make sense to buy shares of the company that controls the world's food supply, but sometimes it's better to forego revenue in order to actually make the world a better place. Hi there! I hope you liked the video despite the rather questionable nature of the subject. I can tell you that making this video was not easy. I mean, here at Business Casual, we try to take an objective look at the companies we cover, which, but when you've got a corporation like Monsanto, that's a little bit hard. Nevertheless,
So, guys, tell me that was not extremely I'm just a talking and it's muted, guys. I apologize. I was thinking about, some information I wanted to get into, and with doing so, I'm just wondering if it's going to take us into some other information. So I don't really want to go too long on that, but let's see, maybe I can read a little bit and then do a part two. Let's see. Maybe a portion would be great. Let me just double check on this information because I don't want to go into the next video that I want to be doing because this information may kind of go in there. So I think we probably will stop right here. Thanks so much for coming out. Thank you guys so much for coming to my new channel. I'm going to try and start doing, I haven't had a lot of time to do any lives, to be quite honest, due to some stuff that I'm handling now, absolutely handling important stuff. So, in trying to do so, I want to be able to make sure that I'm at least coming in, doing a few videos here and there so you guys are able to know where to reach me if something happens with my other channel that they've already struck me twice on. So just keep in mind, you'll be able to find me here for those who are still interested
a document explaining that in
yeah,
1990.
we'll kind of go from there. And I'm going to end it with this the very last video, guys, instead of going into the book, because I really think that's going to lead me into something else. Unfortunately, we don't want to make this too long, because I do have a couple things to do today. But we're going to get into another video, give you some information on these corporations that benefit off of you and consistently are killing us in the process. You know, it's just crazy that this is allowed in a system that we are not aware of. So we're continuously being victims of it. So we just have to be aware of these things and make sure that we're not partaking in being played for victims. Elizabeth, peace, sis. Peace and blessings. You already know. All right, guys, let's get into this last video. And after the conclusion of this, we will be out. Have a great one.
You're Nestle in 1970. You're the inventor of baby formula, a life-saving creation for babies who, for whatever reason, can't breastfeed from their mothers. But just who can breastfeed of the population is such a small customer base. How are you ever looking to expand your formula business even more? Instead of just selling to moms who can't breastfeed, what if you could sell to every mother? If you could do definitely increase by 20 to 100x. The problem is you've got some steep competition. Mother Nature's milk. Compared to the glorified, so you need a way to fool the general public, to dupe them into thinking that formula is.
Hold on, guys, it's doing something weird. Start,
You may be saying to yourself, but Jay,
get this going again. Hold on a moment. Acting weird.
Anyways, you need to convince the world
You
that
guys may not be able to see it,
intentionally
but
making
it's
babies malnutrition.
doing something on this.
Yes.
So
So it's the world that formula.
The third time's the charm. Let's get back to it.
So anyways, you need to convince the world that formula milk is a million times better than breast milk, which means you need a little bit of propaganda. There's to peddle your formula, and the Nestle that will turn into one of the greatest medical scandals of the 20th century, from the biggest food company in the world.
Ever notice when you're making up some quick, you stir until it's rich and thick? You hate to take that first little sip, 'cause you know it'll be gone in a zip. It's so rich and thick and chocolate that you can't drink it slow. If it's quick, oh, Tolio. That's the saddest sound I know.
Businesses like Nestle have a credit rating or a credit score just like you and I do. The better your credit score, the easier your life is. You can rent a place to live easier, you can get a lower interest rate so you're paying less when you buy a house or a car, etc. The problem is traditionally you'd have to get a credit card to start building a card. You need to have good credit, but in order to have good credit, you need a card. Do you see the problem here? You get stuck in this weird chicken and egg loop. You need credit to build credit. Where Extra comes in, today's video sponsor. Extra is the world's first ever debit card that builds up your credit score and earns rewards just like a real credit card. You heard that right, a debit card that lets you score. Here is how it works. All you have to do is connect Extra to your existing bank accounts. Extra will give you a spending limit based on your balance with no credit check. You get your Extra whatever you buy. Extra then spot and auto pays themselves back the next business day. At the end of the month, they refer all your purchases back to the credit bureaus as credit-worthy purchases, building your credit history. And Extra is way better than getting a secured credit card because there's no deposit required.
You know, this night work's kind of rough, isn't it? That's right. But a camel's always a pleasure.
How we're gonna run our propaganda campaign for baby formula instead of starting from scratch at molding public opinion. Cigarette companies.
In a cigarette, tobacco that counts. And Lucky Strike means fine tobacco.
Symbol of death and disease it is today. In the early 1900s, cigarettes were a cultural icon of glamour and sexual allure, a highly prized commodity for 1 out of every. And how did cigarette companies achieve the symbol of sophisticated ads with respectable looking doctors in white coats, puffing away with slogans like more doctors smoke. Early example infantry. Why? Because who do people look up to when it comes to what they consume? Doctors. Who do people look up to determine what's cool? Celebrities. We know with mathematical certainty that large numbers of people will follow the advice of their doctors because we understand the psychological dependence men have on their physicians. So if our goal is to get mothers to choose baby formula over their own breast milk, all we gotta do is to get their doctors to tell them to. So you start Nestle's 1970 campaign. Get doctors to say formula good, bad. Pay doctors and nurses to test your formula as an alternative to breast. And you can hire saleswomen dressed like nurses and get them to hand out free samples and medical advice. You make sure that these free samples are just big enough that by the time they run out, these mothers would have stopped making breast milk naturally, cementing a profitable, loyal customer. Who cares if Africa, one of your biggest markets, has polluted water? Who cares if most of the moms using your formula don't know that they need to boil the water first to prevent the bacteria and the baby sick? Who cares if it's estimated that babies who are 50 times more likely to die of diarrhea and 4 times likely to die of pneumonia compared to breastfed babies? But that's not your fault, obviously. You print the instructions on the problem. Powdered cow's milk, sugar, and vegetable oil are even close to real breast milk. It contains none of the stuff that can help babies fight off diseases or build natural immunity. It doesn't even contain enough nutrients to keep a baby healthy. And in 1978, Nestle executives were even brought before the US Senate to explain why
not be used where there is impure water. Yes or no? Just answer. What is your position?
Of course not, but we cannot cope with that.
Well, as I understand what you say is where there's impure water, it should not be used.
Yes.
Where the people are so poor that they're not going to realistically be able to continue to purchase that, and which is going to mean that they're going to dilute it to a point, which is going to endanger the health, that it should not be used.
Yes.
All right, now, then my final question is what do you do, or what do you feel is your corporate responsibility to the extent of the use of your product in those circumstances in the developing part of the world. Have any responsibility?
We can't have that responsibility, sir. May I make a reference to...
You can't have that responsibility?
No.
1981, the World Health Organization set new regulations where you can no longer compare breast milk with alternatives. That was solved by moving your marketing to somewhere with fewer restrictions, like Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Formula sales are skyrocketing, while acting like you are breast milk's biggest fan in the US and Europe, creating a tree baby ban to get your point across.
This is a breastfeeding song.
And even after millions will start boycotting your products and stricter laws to stop you from tricking people into using your formula, there are still reports of Nestle paying their doctors to promote their products, giving out free samples for advertising in hospitals. Today.
I would almost argue you should never give your child any formula that you haven't run by your pediatrician.
Formula milk has around a 23% profit margin, meaning companies like Nestle make around 23 cents for every dollar in sales. And by 2026, this industry is set to be worth more than $110 billion. Oh, you're so sadly mistaken. What is the number one thing humans need to survive? A cider. Cider business can be very lucrative if done right. See, tap was out of your sink is pretty inexpensive. But bottle up that tap water, market it as coming from Clear Mountain Springs or Majestic Fountains, and you have a ridiculous markup. You can buy a tank of tap water for $10, use it to fill thousands of plastic bottles, and then resell it for $50,000.
Nestle pays $10. Once bottled, the same $50,000.
And by the way, Nestle literally sold bottled water with one of the lawsuits dating back to as early as 2012. You can only get away with so much in first world countries. It's third world countries where you can really take it to an extreme. In Pakistan in 2013, it was revealed that Nestle was diverting clean drinking water away from villages and towns and then packaging it in their factories. They would then resell it back to the same people they took it from. It's pretty genius if you ask. The people in these towns were forced to pretty polluted water because they couldn't afford to buy the bottled water that was actually theirs to begin with. Here is what the chairman of Nestle had to say about whether or not everyone should have access to water.
Die eine Anschauung, extrem würde ich sagen, wird von einigen von den NGOs vertreten, die darauf pochen, dass Wasser zu einem öffentlichen Recht erklärt wird. Das heißt, als Mensch sollten Sie einfach Recht haben, Wasser zu haben. Das ist die eine Extremlösung.
A decade later, he clarifies his position.
I've always supported the human right to water. Everyone should have enough clean, safe water to meet their fundamental daily needs.
But if you thought Nestle stopped there, you are still sadly mistaken.
Dad says he can pick his favorite chocolate blindfolded. Was it that one? Nope. Try this one. Yes, that's it. No mistaking it. That's Nestle's chocolate, the smoothest, creamiest chocolate of them all. Try the blindfold test. Prove Nestle's best. N-E-S-T-L-E-S, Nestle's for the very best chocolate.
Nestle baby formula? Bad. Nestle bottled water? Bad. But at least your candy is okay, right? I mean, what could be more innocent than a Kit Kat? Wrong again. 3 million tons of chocolate is eaten every year. But have you ever wondered where those coca crops come from? Well, a good chunk of it is grown in Africa, including the ones used by Nestle, which can involve a lot of child labor. Chocolate is for Kit Kat Bar 1 and the Milky Bar are all Nestle chocolate bars. And let's face it, coca is expensive. All the way from Africa, which is already eating into your profits. So what do? You tap into the cheap labor market. More specifically, you start buying coca beans from farms that use forced child labor to harvest the beans. And it was all going according to plan until the year 2000, when a report came out that Nestle, Cadbury, and Mars were all guilty of buying blood coca, and that they knew about it all along. Nestle promised to free its chocolate candy from slave labor by 2005. It missed that deadline, and all the deadlines after that. The excuse? quote, the use of child labor in our coca supply chain goes against everything we stand for, end quote, says Nestle Executive Vice President of Operations Jose Lopez. Quote, no company sourcing coca from the Ivory Coast can guarantee that it doesn't happen, but we can say that tackling child labor is a top priority for the company, end quote, which obviously made people even angrier. You collect all the coca you can find from farms child labor and made Kit Kat, slap a fair trade label on it, and it picks up a form carrying Nestle. All the while, you still continue using dirty coca for all your other candy. And when trends change from being morally correct to being environmentally correct, you switch to a much cheaper alternative, environmentally friendly label that takes less effort, money, and resources, and diverts attention away from your shady supply chain. But if you thought Nestle stopped there, you are yet again sadly mistaken.
I see automation displaces labor in your organization. Slow. Ah, Captain Q, bring me in a glass of delicious chocolate quick, won't you?
Thank you, Doctor. I could use some energy.
Evidently, one of those torpedoes you fired at me was circling, and you're sucking. Toodaloo! Captain Q!
Some people get quick.
Countries in the world, and in 2002 they were in the middle of one of the famine history. Well, in 1980s, bought a German company based in Ethiopia that had been nationalized in the 70s. The Nestle money and offered 1.5 million as compensation, but by 2000, due to a new exchange rate, this amount had become $6 million. As Nestle, you could have written that debt off pretty easily. There were millions of people starving in Ethiopia, and 6 million could have went a long way. It could provide safe drinking water for 1.5 million families, or anti-diarrhea medicine for 750,000 kids. But instead of writing this debt off, you demand your money back. Even while you were making a $3.9 billion, if people in Nestle now, and by trying to get almost 300,000 people and has 376 factories worldwide. Nestle is one of the best employers in Europe and a powerhouse of a food company. A food company where even Nestle has admitted that 60% of its controversial tactics, to say the least. No one can deny the international need for water, formula milk, and yes, even chocolates. They did a pretty good job of keeping their shady past under wraps, so people are still buying products from their almost 2,000 different brands. Operates in the 100,000 people and has 376 factories worldwide. Nestle is one of the best employers in Europe and a powerhouse of a food company. A food company where even Nestle has admitted that 60% of its products aren't even healthy.
Again, I kind of look like an SJW.